Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the California Consultation Series hosted by Circular Action Alliance, or CAA. My name is Frances Oni, and I will be moderating today's webinar. Next slide, please. First, let's review today's agenda. We will introduce our panelists, then we will give an overview of CAA and SB 54. Next, we'll have a presentation on fee setting methodology and allocation of the Plastic Pollution Mitigation Fund, followed by a Q&A period. We'll finish off today's webinar by reviewing important next steps. With that, let's meet today's panelist. Next slide. We have our legal disclaimer first. So today's presentation is intended for informational purposes only. CAA is not a law firm and does not provide legal advice. If you need legal guidance, please consult with your own counsel. Next slide. We want to underscore our commitment to compliance with federal and state antitrust laws. As participants, we need to avoid discussions around pricing, market allocation, or other topics that could create even the appearance of anti-competitive behavior. Next slide. Today's panelists are Emily Coven, CAA's California Executive Director, Aaron Berman, Vice President of Data and Analytics, Alex Chan, an EPR consultant, and Dave Lefebvre is a policy advisor and producer engagement. Next slide. A few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded, and both the recording and the slide deck will be available on CAA's California Consultation webpage. After today's webinar, you'll receive a link to a questionnaire. We encourage you to complete it within 30 days as your input is essential to shaping a practical and effective program plan. Please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions, and we'll address as many questions as possible during the Q&A portion of the webinar. All participants will remain muted throughout this session. CAA provides updates on program plan development at the Producer Responsibility Advisory Board meetings, which anyone can attend by registering on CalRecycle's website. Next slide, please. We encourage you to register and attend the remainder of CAA's California Consultation Series webinars. And now I'd like to hand it over to Emily Coven, CAA's California Executive Director.
Thanks, Frances. We can go to the next slide. So I am just going to give a quick overview of CAA for those of you who are not as familiar with the organization and who we are and what we do before we get into the details here. So next slide. First of all, in terms of what CAA is, we are a nonprofit founded by the companies that you see on your screen here. So we're producer-founded, producer-led, and we are dedicated to implementing effective packaging and paper EPR laws in the United States. I will go to the next slide here. If you look at this, you can see where we are active in this country. So there are EPR laws in several states in the United States now. The first one to go live in this country, it was earlier this year, was Oregon. Colorado is not far behind. California is the third state. And then the other states that you see on your screen will be coming as well. CAA is the pro selected in every state that has selected a pro so far. There's more coming down. And so in terms of who we are, we're a group of people that's actually spread across the US. We are a remote company, so we have people everywhere. We also have employees up in Canada, and the reason for that is that Canada has had quite a jump start on the US in terms of packaging EPR, a lot of experience there, a lot of knowledge there, and so we're fortunate to have that knowledge within CAA. We're also fortunate here in California to have Oregon and Colorado to look to because they've gone first. They're figuring things out. We don't totally have to reinvent the wheel here in California, which is really lucky for us. We can learn from our colleagues in other places. Next slide. In terms of what a producer responsibility organization is, it's complicated. We do a lot of different things. So if you look at this graphic here, we tried to illustrate all the different things we do. Today, we are up at the top of the clock here at 12 o'clock. This is our consultation where we are engaging communities and interest holders. That's you watching. Thank you for joining today. What's super important is that as we build our program plan for how we're actually going to implement implement SB 54, that the voices of everyone who's going to be impacted are heard. So we are really, really hoping that this will be my first of many times I will say this. Please participate, please do that by filling out the questionnaire that will become available at the end of this webinar. Super important that you have your voice heard. This is a really big opportunity to let us know what you think, where your concerns are, and make sure your voice is heard. So as we're sort of doing these consultations, we're also developing this program plan. We will submit that to the state of California in June of 2026. Presuming that is approved, we move into actually implementing the plan. So we will set producer fees, which you'll be hearing about today, collect those fees. Those fees are meant to incentivize packaging design changes. And then we will be using those fees to invest in the recycling system, to fund development of end markets, and to do education and outreach throughout the state of California. So that's sort of in a nutshell. Look at this on your own time. You can download the slides afterwards if you like to really kind of get your head around what this is. It's a new idea here in the US pretty recently. Okay, next slide. One thing I do want to clarify is the difference between CAA and CalRecycle. I think this is not totally intuitive or obvious, so I won't read through all these bullet points, but again, you can look at them in your own time. CAA, we are fundamentally involved in the planning of the program and the implementation of the law. CalRecycle, on the other hand, is regulatory, so they are developing the regulations, and then once we're up and running, they will have oversight over CAA. And so I think one thing that people have been experiencing is they ask CAA a question and we say, oh, go ask CalRecycle. And then we ask CalRecycle a question and we say, no, they say, oh, go talk to CAA. So we're trying to sort of, to whatever extent we can, make it more clear so that you know who to go to depending on what your concern or your issue is. Next slide. So SB 54 in a nutshell has three really big audacious goals. Two of these are sort of industry-wide, and therefore the obligation to achieve them falls onto us at CAA. And those are to reduce single-use plastic in California by 25%, with 10% of that coming from reuse and refill or elimination, so converting single-use disposable packaging into reusable ones or eliminating altogether. Another big one is to recycle 65% of all single-use plastic. And then there's another goal that is upon individual producers, and that is to ensure that 100% of packaging is either recyclable or compostable. Again, that's packaging sold in California. These goals are for 2032. There are some stair-step goals along the way in 27, 28, and 30. But ultimately, as we are working on our program plan, these are the goals we're looking at because that's our end game. Okay, next slide, please. So in terms of what we're asking from you all today, it's ideas to put into our program plan. It's things we need to think about. It's what we should be doing as an organization as we build out this plan. That said, we have some constraints that these ideas have to exist within. So one of them is legal. So we have to have everything we do has to be within the statute, within the regulations. We have a constriction of time. A lot of things that we could potentially do might take 20 years. We don't have 20 years. We have basically five or six. So we have to do things that, we have to make changes and do things that will work quickly. We have financial constraints. You'll be hearing about fee setting today. We are not setting infinite fees, and therefore we have to, be mindful about what fees we're raising and then what we're doing with those and do that in a cost-efficient manner. And then finally, our least favorite, but probably biggest challenge constraint is uncertainty. Right now, our big uncertainty is we don't have final regulations, but there's a lot of other unknowns out there that we're trying to clarify as we can. But that's kind of the boundaries we're working in. But within those boundaries, please send in your ideas, your big ideas, your small ideas. There's no bad ideas. Like, we want to hear everything. The more we hear from you, the better we're going to be able to implement that into our program plan. And finally, my final slide is Just a quick note on the importance of California. California is not only the biggest state in the country, it is not only the fourth largest economy in the world, it also has the most ambitious EPR packaging laws that we've seen. By the time that we implement this law, it will be the single largest packaging EPR program in the world. And so your participation in this process not only impacts this big state, but it actually has this much bigger impact beyond California. I've heard so many times the world is watching California, all eyes are on California. People really are looking to this state to see how this goes here. And so, to the extent that we can show the world what works, what's possible, I think that really will have a big impact around the world. So, as you think about providing your input, don't think about it just within the boundaries of California, but this is really a moment in time to have impact on a national, if not global scale. So again, please send your ideas. I think I've said that enough. I will hand it over to Aaron Berman to find out what you're actually hearing about today.
Great. Well, thanks so much for the introduction, Emily. So we'll talk today about our fee setting methodology. And so this is something that we've, as Emily was saying, we've started to employ in Oregon as well as Colorado. And then the other thing that we'll talk about today is how we will allocate the cost of the Plastic Pollution Mitigation Fund so that each of the producers of plastic material has to pay into that fund. And so we'll be talking about how we'll incorporate that into our fee setting methodology. So for today, we just kind of have four goals, walk through the California requirements. So we'll have some, various references to the statute that we're kind of pulling from to kind of highlight the things that, we know that we need to do to be compliant with this legislation. And then we'll kind of go through our fee setting methodology. So I'll talk about our principles. It's really important for us to, have a fair and transparent fee setting methodology. So I'll also talk a little bit about the cost to manage index and how we do those allocations. And we'll also talk, as I was just saying, about the Plastic Pollution Mitigation Fund. This is again, how we will be, apportioning the costs to all of the producers so that they will pay into this fund. We don't have anything to do with what happens to the money. We just give it to the state of California, and they will, do with it to kind of meet the goals that they've set for that fund. And then the last thing we'll talk about a little bit is the plastic component fee, and this is something that is new to and unique to California. So again, sort of an expansion of our fee setting methodology. So the first thing we'll just kind of go through is what the different roles are. So obviously we're, as the pro, we'll be developing the fee schedule, make sure that it fits all of the requirements that we lay out here and that are in the legislation. And then we'll update those each year. And so for those of so for producers, we have them, report to us every May. We release fees in October, and then invoices for producers would come out the following year. So the producer then obviously pays the fee schedule, and there is a note in the legislation that this can't be a separate charge that's allocated or that's itemized when passing it with consumers. So there's kind of two different types of fees that are laid out in the legislation, and so I'll talk about both of those. There's the early fees, and this is something that's prior to the approval of the plan. We do have some flexibility to where there's a few years before we have to meet all of the SB 54 requirements for the fee schedule, but we'll be implementing sort of material-based fees starting in 2027, which would be the reporting year that's coming up here. So I'll show you in the next slide what that means. But The early fees are going to be weight-based, but are really just at a material class level. So there's just like 8 categories that we'll be asking for, or that we'll be using for the fee setting. But then after that, we do it based on all 90 some categories. We'll have an individual fee rate for each of those categories. All of our fees are published in a pounds per or a dollars or a cents per pound is basically how we talk about them. So for every pound of material that the producers, then they would pay the fee rate for that. So this is kind of our current plan. I think as Emily mentioned, there's still some uncertainty with when the regulations will go into effect. So basically we've got across the top sort of 5 different sort of times that we'll be releasing fee schedules. So the first one will happen early next year. We're going to not until after the regulations are put in place, and so it'll be sometime hopefully early 2026. These will be illustrative fees, and this is really just to try to give all of the producers and other stakeholders an idea of, or the producers really, an idea of how much the fees will be in California. So we'll be developing a budget, obviously bringing into the producer or the PPMF, the Plastic Pollution Mitigation Fund, and all of the other costs that we have to bring into the system, into the fees. We'll build all of those out and kind of give a full fee schedule so that producers can kind of understand how the base fees will be. And then that will allow them to understand, what the source reduction fees will be as well, as we're trying to meet that 25% reduction in single-use plastics. And so we're really trying to give some early indication for producers to be able to put together a plan to meet those source reduction targets. So the illustrative fees are really just, our initial try at setting the fees, our initial sort of view that we'll give to all the producers. The early fees we'll be setting early next year as well. I think they'll be invoiced sometime later next year, but this is really just for the pre-program costs. And so this will be the cost to develop the program plan, and kind of scale up the organization, and then probably do maybe some small investments in the system, but really just to focus on the pre-program costs. So this would be the costs that we would incur for over the last couple of years up through next year. The next set of fees that we'll release will be what we call draft fees. So these will be kind of the full EPR fees, obviously weight and component based, and make sure that this will be what we would predict would comply with the plan. Those ones won't be invoiced. We'll just be putting them into the plan that we'll be submitting in June, and those will be part of the overall plan. The first year, we will be doing actual EPR fees, so those will be full weight and component based. There are some pretty detailed requirements, and so we do have some options the first couple of years as to whether or not we can meet all of the full requirements, but by 2029, we would be meeting all of those requirements. So these are going to be the fees that will actually fund the program, all of the reimbursements, all of the regulatory costs, and also the Plastic Pollution Mitigation Fund. So a few things that we have to do as we're setting the fees, according to the regulations, we have to make sure that the materials that are easier and less expensive to recycle have lower fees. Similar, the ones that are designed to be recycled in a closed loop manner should also have lower fees. And then things that are easier to be composted are also going to have lower fees. So we'll talk a little bit about how we do that within our model. You can see here some of the costs that we will have to cover. I won't go through all those, but in general, you probably, if you've been to some of the other webinars, the reimbursement webinars have really focused around, all of the different costs that we would be reimbursing, so the new and additional costs. And then there's other things as well that, if we, in order to meet our source reduction, targets, our recyclability targets, things like that, there may be other things outside of just the reimbursement that we'll have to fund as well. The other thing that we want to look at is, one of the unique things about the California laws, it's sort of really trying to, incentivize recyclability. And so anything that is made more difficult to recycle, according to this is, specifically around plastics, that, if it has different labels or inks or other adhesives that make it more difficult to recycle, then those, then those things need to be, in essence, sort of penalized, and that need to affect, or the fees need to reflect that increased cost of that. And we always include the commodity revenue, so materials that have a higher value at their end of life will end up having a lower fee rate than ones that don't have as much value. So at a very high level, all we do is to take the overall program costs and divide it by producer supply. So we always get producer supply reports, as I said, sort of in May. And then we review those reports, make sure that they're accurate. At the same time, we're coming up with the budget for the upcoming year. And then by October, we can then we would release the fees for that. But one of the things that we want to make sure is in addition to just sort of dividing the program cost by the producer supply, we really want to have differentiation between the different material types. And so our guiding principles really kind of focus to make sure that there's we try to harmonize as much as we can across the states. We really want this to be a fair methodology so that each material is paying kind of their fair share of the system, and we want them to be, clear and understandable. So we've already developed this methodology. It's gone through program plan approvals in Oregon and Colorado, and so we'll leverage a very similar methodology here for both our fee setting and our cost to manage index. So I'll walk through the principles because these are just incredibly important, I think, to me and to the organization to make sure that we can, we stick by these each time we're doing fee setting. So, we're trying to make sure that these are harmonized across different states so that there's, a general understanding of the differences between them. Each state does have some unique requirements and different costs that that we have to cover. And so the fee rates won't be the same across states, but they will be something that we hope that they are, consistently developed across the different states. Fairness, again, we want to make sure that, each of the different producers that supply covered materials are all paying for sort of their fair share of the recycling system. So even if something isn't recycled or is not recycled at a high rate today, those producers that produce those materials still do need to pay a portion of the overall system cost. Anytime there's kind of specific material costs, those are things that if we're going to set up a program to specifically collect a certain material type, in some states, there's separate collection for glass, for example. Anytime we can, we'll want to allocate those things to specific materials, to the specific materials that incur those costs. Often, we'll be making investments in the recovery infrastructure for specific materials, and we would try to have those costs be borne by those materials themselves. As I mentioned, the commodity revenue will also contribute to the fee rate. So materials that have a lot of revenue, that get revenue, will have a lower fee rate. So one concept that I wanted to at least kind of make sure everybody understood is, eco-modulation. And there's a slide. The next slide will kind of go into it a little bit more. But we basically have our base fees, which are going to cover the cost of the system. And then we'll try to do also have eco-modulation, which would be to give either incentives or disincentives, also called bonuses and maluses. And those are going to be things that we'll try to, incentivize things that are good for the circular economy, including, PCR content, so post-consumer recycled material content and packaging. We also incentivize recyclability. A lot of times we'll incentivize source reduction. In this case, we'll also have reuse and refill. So all of those things, we'll try to kind of have additional factors that can help to reduce the fee rates for producers that are, in essence, trying to do the things that will benefit the circular economy. Throughout each of the different programs that we've implemented so far, there's always a concept of responsible end markets. This is also somewhat of a new concept in EPR programs, and one that you see quite a bit more often. So we do try to track the material to the end market to make sure that it's not doing that they're meeting all of the environmental goals, that they're meeting general sustainability and ethical goals. And so we kind of have a whole program that we're developing that is really around ensuring that the material that gets recycled in California or any of these other states with EPR is being sent to responsible end markets. And finally, as I mentioned, the clarity. So we're hoping that webinars such as this one, and we have ones for producers specifically who are members of our organization, that we do deep dives on the fees and the fee setting methodologies each time that we release more fees. So hopefully that gives producers an understanding of how we do our fee setting. So I wanted to kind of walk through this. This is just sort of a high-level diagram. Again, there's kind of, you see in orange, the kind of the fee schedule, which is our end result that we're trying to get to. And that would be each covered material category, or CMC, and the cents per pound that the fee rate would be. And also we'll talk a little bit about the, cents per plastic component. So that fee schedule will be, kind of the end result, but the pieces that we bring together to get there, first for the base fees, we're going to bring in the total program cost, as I talked about a little bit earlier, the producer supply, and then to kind of get to this differentiation between, the cost. So, for example, 1 pound of an easily recyclable material, we should have a lower cost, as was stated earlier, than one that's more difficult to recycle. And so, in order to do that, we built what we call our cost to manage model. And I got a few slides on that that'll kind of walk through how that works. But it definitely provides sort of a differentiated fee rate for each, different type of material. Once we have our base fees, and we also look at eco-modulation, and that would be, that can be that sometimes is applied at the material category level. So all of the, producers who, produce a certain material type would all pay either, or, pay an extra malus, or would get a bonus, or the bonuses can often be on applications that are submitted by individual producers. And so that would be if they have PCR or something like that, we can say you'll get a discount on your fee rates based on the sort of the performance of the factors that you're implementing in your packaging. So the CTM model is really as I said, kind of to create that cost variation between materials. So it's a whole series of modules that is really there to simulate the actual recycling system. And so it starts with kind of the material, where it's originating, how much is being generated in different areas, how much is being recovered by the different collection systems, and really that kind of the model of where that material is going. We also use quite a bit of different factors for allocating the material in each of the different kind of cost centers. And so this is really based on a vast amount of the team here has intense experience on recycling systems and composting systems and how all of that the material flows, what happens to it, what's easy, what's hard, and all of that kind of thing to build up these modules. So kind of the first thing that we're going to do is take the budget that we have to reimburse for, and then we'll take that and kind of divide it out into our major cost centers. And so that's curbside collection, and that curbside would also include multifamily, and in California it often includes some commercial material as well. We also have, kind of depot and drop off systems where, people have to go somewhere to drop them off. Once it goes from either of those places, it'll usually end up in a transfer station, which would be an interim, facility where they're just kind of, taking the local material and then aggregating it to send to a large MRF or recycling processing facility. So within each of those, we have detailed cost models that quantify the cost of the trucks and the labor and the bins and the material, the fuel, all of these kinds of things that go into the cost to manage these materials. So that's kind of our first take is to model the system as it is in each state, understanding sort of the type of MRFs that are available, the amount of automation, or the amount of staffing or labor that it takes, and build each of those out to understand the total cost for each of these different cost centers. Then you're going to go in and look at the material. That's what happens to each of the different materials in each of these different cost centers. And so, for example, here's some different ones that you can kind of see how we allocate the costs. And so if you've got a bin that the material gets put into, we'll allocate the cost based on the volume like the loose volume of that material in the cart, because you've got kind of the one cost for the cart or the bin, and we need to allocate it to all the materials that are there. So we do that based on the loose volume. Once it gets picked up by a truck, then we'll look at what the compacted volume would be in the truck. So it's like compacted bulk density that we would use to allocate the costs across these different materials. General sort of costs, we'll kind of allocate equally across the different materials. Once you get into, the MRF infrastructure, then we kind of go through and look at what exactly is happening to, the material, what equipment is being used to sort that material out, or what labor is being used to sort that material out. So it can get very detailed in there to identify exactly what material is getting sorted at each different part of the recycling facility. So once we kind of get all of those different costs, we add those all up and get a generalized cost per ton. And that is then used. We then normalize all of those costs per ton to get to what we call our CTM index. And so the CTM index is really, here to cause that differentiation of the fee rates. And so on the low end, for those who have been in the recycling world for a while, would recognize ONP, the old newspaper, or MP mixed paper. But those are going to be often, sort of the printed papers are generally the lower cost per ton. Obviously the very dense materials are one of the first things that are taken out at a recycling facility, at a single stream facility, to separate the paper from the rest of the containers. And then there's so those are going to be kind of the lower cost ones. As you get up, you get some of the more less dense materials. So things like aluminum cans and PET bottles. And those ones will often have specific equipment, optical sorters, or eddy currents, things like that, that are going to be that are going to kind of attract more cost to those. But this is really just kind of a way to differentiate the cost between the materials that are easier to be recycled and the ones that are more difficult. So when we look at kind of back to where we started with the SB 54 requirements, making sure that the things that are easier to recycle are cheaper, that have lower fees than the ones that are more difficult. A lot of that's going to be accomplished within the CTM model, and then we'll outside of the CTM, or in addition to that, we'll put in kind of the material specific and targeted investments that would be assigned to each of those categories. Some of the things we will need to, have eco-modulation on top of the base fees to, satisfy all the requirements that CalRecycle has put into these regulations. So there's a few different cost categories that we'll look at for the fee setting. So the primary one that usually makes up 70 plus 80% of the overall cost is the material management cost, and that's going to be the amount of money that we're reimbursing, just kind of the reimbursing to the supply chain. So this is going to be for things that we just talked about: collection, processing. It also can include service expansions. So, if there's areas that aren't getting recycling service right now, those can be, we can include those in and for recycling, add capital upgrades, improvements to the MRF infrastructure, or to the collection infrastructure, all of that. So material management is going to be the majority of the costs overall. Those are ones that we're going to allocate based on the supply tons. So that would be the amount of supply tons times their CTM factor. And so, that's basically going to give the differentiation, so that, the ones that are more expensive to recycle will get weighted by that CTM value. The non-material management costs, these are going to be, costs that we have to pay to CalRecycle, costs that we incur for education outreach to get us to that 65% recycling rate. Also the program development, the pro costs, all of those kind of things. And those are going to be allocated 70% in a very similar manner to the material management costs. So 70% of the cost of those costs will be allocated very similarly. But 30%, there is kind of some base costs that we want all materials, each material category to have. And so those, we take 30% of the non-material management costs and allocate those based on the number of producers that report into a specific category. The program reserves is another piece. We have to build up reserves to make sure that we're able to, sort of adjust if there's changes in the amount of reimbursement that we need to do during a certain year. We've all been through the various price shocks of the recycling system. So, it could be that the recycling revenues go up quite a bit. They could also go down. So all of that, means that we need to build up some reserves. CalRecycle requires us to have about 6 months of reserves, which is fairly common for EPR programs. Those ones are going to also be allocated based on the material share of the material management costs. Finally, the material specific ones are not allocated. Those are going to be ones that are directly applied to those specific material categories. So that's going to be our kind of base, fee setting methodology. That's how we'll do, the sort of the majority of the costs will be allocated in those ways. there's a very unique part of the California regulations, which is the Plastic Pollution Mitigation Fund. And so this is something that CAA or any of independent producers need to collectively raise $5 billion over the next 10 years. And so we just raise the money. We pass it off to the state agencies who will administer that. We have no control over that, and we won't assume that any of that will help us reach any of our goals. That's just to pay to the state to mitigate the effects of historical plastic pollution. We can get, and we're working to get commitments from plastic resin manufacturers to also contribute. They can contribute up to $150 million each year, and so that can reduce the amount that would be borne by the producers themselves. We'll divide the material out, and so actually I'll just go to the next slide. So it's basically it's 500 million a year charged to all the producers of that supply plastic into California, and so the ones who supply more will pay a larger share of that $500 million. So similar to Cal Recycle, we'll be allocating the fees to pay into this fund based on each producer's average share of plastic, of weight of plastic, and also the number of components. And so this is very similar to what Cal Recycle is going to do if there's any independent producers who don't join the organization but want to be an independent producer within the regulations. And so they would have a similar methodology. But this one does not utilize the CTM factor, and that's mainly because we're not using the money to improve the recycling system or to have any effect on it, and so it doesn't really have that same sort of cost to manage angle that we're trying to balance with the fee rates. So this will just be based on total share of plastic weight and components. We did do some thinking around whether if we do get voluntary donations from the plastic resin manufacturers, whether we should apply those kind of specifically to certain material categories, but in the end, not understanding sort of all of the intricacies of the hard hydrocarbon supply chain. We just decided that any money that's given by the plastic resin manufacturers will just reduce the overall amount that's paid by producers. So there won't be any differentiation based on the type of plastic that any of those plastic resin manufacturers happen to make. Kind of the last thing that we'll talk about is this, plastic component fee. And so in other states, we always are just doing a cents per pound for the fee rates. But in this one, we'll have separate cents per pound and cents per unit of plastic components. And so this will again try to help incentivize the reduction of plastic components. And since that's critical to us meeting our 25% reduction in single-use plastics, because that reduction is a reduction in weight, but it's also a reduction in the number of plastic components. And so this will really help us to, kind of incentivize producers to help to reduce both the amount of plastic and also the number of plastic components that they're putting on the market. So with that, that kind of wraps up our fee setting methodology and how we plan to implement the regulations that Cal Recycle has put forward.
Thank you so much, Aaron. As a reminder, please put your questions into the Q&A if you have them. We've already received many questions. We will try to get to as many as possible. And then with that, we'll turn it over to Alex Chen. Thank you.
Thanks, Francis. Thanks, Aaron. A few questions coming through the chat. I'll direct them to you, Aaron, see if you can help answer them. There's a few questions around the early fees that you presented on. Can you provide any more visibility as to when the the early fees will be released and invoiced?
Yeah, certainly. And before I do, I did just want to, Alex Chan has been integral to all of our fee setting, the methodologies and everything that we've developed here so far. So thankful that he was able to join the call as well today. So just in terms of the early fees, right now we won't release. So the early fees will be we'll be creating the early fees. There's already ranges that are in the portal, and so the range of those fees has been published. The actual fees we will be basing on the 2023 baseline that producers are able to report right now in our portal, and is due November 15th. But so we'll be releasing those fees early next year. We don't have the exact date, mainly just because we need to wait till the regulations are finalized before we can release any of those fees. The invoicing is going to be mid next year, probably, Q3 is what we're planning on right now. Again, sort of trying to kind of hold out until the regulations get finalized before announcing when exactly that will be.
Great. One more specific question around early fees. So the estimated ranges for early fees have been published. There are two material classes that relate to paper fibers. One is just a paper fiber class, and one is a polycoat laminated paper fiber class. What's the difference between them? And what CMCs are covered in both classes?
And that's a good question, and will be, certainly Cal Recycle has released guidance for reporting in each of the, different categories. The early fees we have differentiated the paper fiber ones from the polycoated materials. So the polycoated materials will generally be things like, polycoated paper cups and aseptic and gable top containers, freezer board, those kind of things will all be included there. And that's really since many of those materials are, sort of much lower supply than, things like boxboard and cardboard. We wanted to have a differentiation between those two sets of fees. And so we do have a kind of a list of the categories of the California CMCs that will be included in the polycoat category, and that's something that we can share, that we'll share when we release the fees as well.
A question around reporting, and perhaps Nikki could help support the answer as well. The question is, we understand that we need to report all 2023 sales by November 15th for you to calculate a baseline for source reduction. But how would we avoid paying early fees for products that we sold in 2023 but have since been banned?
That's a good question. So we'll be creating the fee schedule based off the 2023 data, but we'll actually be invoicing it based on the data that comes in May. So it'll be due May 31st, and that'll be the 2025 reporting or data year. And so you won't have to pay anything on things that you've discontinued or that have since been banned in those interim years. So the invoicing themselves will be based on the supply that you report by May 31st.
Okay. A question specific to compostable products. So would home compostable certified products carry a considerably lower fee?
It's a good question, and it's something that we'll have to kind of work out. I think if for producers who have seen the Colorado fees, we are kind of in this space where the compostable materials are often a contaminant in the recycling stream. We often have to pay sort of direct, costs to upgrade the compost facilities and things like that. And so I don't think that we'll have a distinct differentiation, at least in this first year, for home compostable things. And we know there's just so much confusion in the marketplace for those, and so more to come on it. We're definitely trying. We will want to make sure that things are that are easier to compost are have lower fees, and so I think home composting would fit that category. But I don't know exactly how that'll compare to the overall the fees for other materials as well.
Great, thanks. A question around the CTM module that you were describing, Aaron. It's a specific question around the contaminants. How are the costs to remove contaminants, like the downtime associated with plastic film, jamming the Starscream separators? How would those costs be allocated to the materials that caused that problem?
Yeah, so we do quite a bit to model the overall cost of a recycling facility and their operations. And so we do have, the cost of, things like, maintenance and downtime, and all of that. And so those costs are allocated to, the materials that cause those, and wherever we can. And so, if it is a covered material, then we can allocate the costs associated with that to it. And so it does mean that, some of the costs of the contaminants to remove those, whether it's, in via downtime or just, having extra, sorters to clean up the streams for materials that aren't currently accepted, all those costs would be, kind of built into the CTM modules that I discussed earlier.
Great, thanks for the response. Then there's a group of questions that are associated with the Plastic Pollution Mitigation Fund, the PPMF, which you were describing, Aaron.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll get to those. So the advisory board had recommended that the Plastic Pollution Mitigation Fund be funded to the maximum extent possible through fees to plastic resin manufacturers, as allowed under PLC 42064E3. Could you describe or explain how the fee setting structure will do that?
Yeah, so it's kind of in some ways a separate sort of work stream for us right now. And so, our material services team is engaging with the resin manufacturers so that they can understand the I don't know, I guess the benefits of for their customers to pay into this fund, so that's not borne by their customers, which would be the producers. And so, we've been working with them. We'll be trying to get, agreements for them to donate money to pay into this fund on an annual basis. But, there's no guarantees. The legislation is, very much states that it's a voluntary thing. But it's a high priority for us to, try to leverage that, because it's, as a producer-led organization, that's a good way for us to, reduce the amount of cost that's borne by the producers. So it is a big work stream to try to get them to do it. Once if we are able to kind of secure some of those funding streams, then that would just reduce the amount that the rest of the producer community has to pay. So if we were able to get the full amount, would go from paying the producers would go from paying 500 million a year to 350 million per year, and so that would reduce each of the the fee rates for the PPMF by basically by 30% or so.
Right. Um, any contributions from resin manufacturers are going to be voluntary, and it's up to a maximum of 150 million. A question here is that will the $150 million contribution be a one-time collection or a yearly collection?
The hope would be that that would be a yearly collection, that would be something that we could get agreements for them to fund. Since it is over 10 years, it could turn into $1.5 billion.
Right. And for the just a weighting question on how this fund is to be allocated as cost to plastics. Is the weighting against plastic weight versus plastic component? What is that weighting when this fund is being allocated as cost to plastics?
I don't know if we've fully finalized that, but I think, and Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's a 50-50 right now based on weight and number of components. But I think that's something that we're still going to evaluate as part of the fee setting methodology.
That's correct. And just one more question on the mitigation fund, and I would invite Emily to also come on screen to help describe the fund and what it does. So this question is about, it says, please let local government reps attending the workshop know that certain state agencies will be the ones making these funds available to address the public health impacts of plastics and injustice. So any comments or color you can add to this question, Emily?
Yeah, for sure. So like Aaron mentioned, it's $500 million a year collected by the CAA and administered by the state of California. So a couple of things about it. It's divided into two parts. 40% of the money, or $200 million a year, goes towards monitoring and reducing environmental impacts. And at least 50% of those funds are meant to benefit residents living in a disadvantaged or low income community or rural area. And then the other part of the money, 60% or 300 million, is designated for monitoring and reducing environmental justice and public health impacts. And at least 75% of those funds go towards benefiting residents living in disadvantaged or low-income community or rural areas. In both cases, the funds may be used to support grants for tribes, NGOs, community-based organizations, land trusts, and local jurisdictions. In terms of how that money is administered, that is by the state of California, and there are a number of agencies listed. You can go to the statute. I won't read them all here because it's a long list, but the Cal EPA is one of them, but it's just one of many. And so the state's really going to be figuring out who's going to be dispersing those funds and how all of that is going to work. So that's the general idea behind the mitigation fund. Again, we can't provide a ton of information beyond that. I'm just summarizing what's in statute. Again, we collect those funds, hand them over to the state, and but yeah, to the extent that you have concerns or questions about that, is definitely a question for the state at this point.
Great, thanks for clarifying, Emily. Mm-hmm. I'll get to one last question before time's up. To Aaron, will the component or unit-based fees be applied only on detachable components, or will they also be based on attached plastic components on non-plastic materials?
So that's something that I know that the guidance is that Cal Recycle has put out is not fully clear, I guess, in my opinion. I don't know, Alex, if you've got insight as to where we think that might end up.
Yeah, I think it's still getting developed and clarified, but I think at this point in time, we're envisioning that the fee will be unit-based on any plastic components that are being reported as supply by producers. And we've got some modeling to do to ensure that those unit fees do make sense and they're rational as part of the fee structure. Francis, you're back.
Thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate your time and participation. The next step is to provide your feedback. Your feedback is very important in developing a robust and effective plan for achieving California's ambitious recycling and packaging waste reduction goals. Please complete the questionnaire using the link provided in the chat. You will also find a link to the questionnaire in an email following this webinar, or you can access the questionnaire by using the QR code on your screen. To do that, simply open the camera app on your smartphone or tablet, point your camera at the QR code on the screen, and then tap on the link that pops up. That will take you directly to the questionnaire. Please submit your responses by 11:59 p.m. Pacific time on November 28th. We look forward to receiving your input. Next slide, please. You can stay up to date by following us on social media, visiting our website, or emailing us at info@circularaction.org. Thank you again for joining us today.